Jumping right back into the show and into our next topic around the AFC South. I've talked a few bits about the AFC South and the Jaguars and obviously Trevor Lawrence, the Tennessee Titans, and their new wide receiver group. Stephon Diggs obviously going to the Texans. And you have the Indianapolis Colts with Anthony Richardson making a comeback. I've talked a good bit about this division, and it is warranted because the way that it's going with all the young talent in there, with all the high-powered offenses, and just the excitement around this division, I think it's slowly growing into one of the best, definitely in the AFC, but arguably in the entire NFL, mostly because of the quarterbacks that I just mentioned. You have one of the highest paid in the NFL in Trevor, the Offensive Rookie of the Year in C.J. Stroud. In just the few sample games that we saw with Anthony Richardson, in just that little amount of time that we saw out of him, you saw the potential threat that he could be on that side of the ball. And also Will Levis, he had his bright moments. He had a bit of a struggling point at some point during his rookie year, but also the game against Atlanta, his first game ever, he balled out. Against Miami, getting a massive win on the road against them. He certainly showed out in some games that should give Tennessee Titans fans a good bit of hope going into 2024, especially getting a new offensive mind as a head coach in Brian Callahan. So that should be the biggest difference maker, right? Which quarterback is the best will most likely determine which team is the best. But a Jaguar safety, Andre Cisco, in his second year, I want to say, he believes that people shouldn't be sleeping on the wide receivers in this division. Basically, he believes that they're as big a difference makers as the quarterbacks can be in this division. If you just look at it, he mentioned that the biggest difference I see is the quality of receivers in the division. I think the receivers have taken a huge jump from what the past 2 years have been in this division. And if we want to take a look at that, and I pretty much agree with what Andre Cisco is saying there by mentioning that point, what the biggest difference makers are. Again, if you just look at it, so two of the teams right now on your screen, as you see, the Jacksonville Jaguars brought in Gabe Davis. They had Christian Kirk, and they also drafted Brian Thomas Jr., who I'm a big fan of. I feel like he was overshadowed a little bit by Malik Nabers, because Malik Nabers definitely deserved all the attention, but Brian Thomas Jr. is certainly a very good player, and I love that he got drafted there with Calvin Ridley moving on within the division, so that was much needed for the Jaguars, and that wide receiver group is already as exciting as most of them get in the entire AFC and in the NFL. Then you look to the right of that, you look at the Houston Texans, probably the best wide receiving trio in this division, I would probably say, with Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins breaking out this year, drafting Tank Dell as well, and he was well on his way to 1,000 yards as a rookie before he got hurt. So three other very impressive players that you have in the Houston Texans. Then if we want to move on to the final two teams, you have the Indianapolis Colts on your right. They drafted A.D. Mitchell, big fan of him. To get him in the second round, I think is an absolute steal for the Colts. They were able to bring back Michael Pittman and re-sign him for what seems like a bargain right now, getting him at around $24 million per year, with what everybody else is 100 or 800 yards last year as a rookie. And again, nobody really points him out that much because the Colts struggled a little bit last year once Anthony Richardson went down. So with that being the case, he got a little bit overshadowed. That's all right. I think he has all the potential to have a massive jump in his second year. Then you look at the Tennessee Titans, and really went from about a 3 or a 4 out of a scale of 10 in terms of their wide receiver group, and jumped up all the way up to a 9, in my opinion, with finding some help for DeAndre Hopkins in Calvin Ridley, stealing him away from the Jacksonville Jaguars in free agency. Did they overpay for him? That's a little bit subjective. Maybe for some people, they definitely overpaid, but I still think he's capable of being a number one receiver. So if he's still a number one, if you could get him on your team, I would certainly do whatever it takes to do that. And that's exactly what the Titans did. And then you look at Tyler Boyd, one of the best remaining free agents and one of the most savvy, experienced number 3 options that you can find anywhere. If he's your number 3, he could very well be a lot of teams' number 2. Maybe not so much a number 1, but a very good number 2. The fact that the Titans got all these guys, 2 out of the 3 of them, in this offseason, is very exciting for these Tennessee Titans fans. And I would have to agree with what Andre Cisco said as the wide receivers being the biggest difference makers in this division. And also, he made a great point that I thought was worth mentioning further in that interview when he said that all quarterbacks in the NFL are basically obviously really good. There's not too many duds out there or many quarterbacks that you can go in and think that you don't have to give your all against them. Most of them, as the NFL really, in my opinion, just gets more talented, more just athletic. All these guys are getting bigger, stronger, and more just physically impressive out there on the field, especially the quarterbacks being able to do so much. And again, just being more athletic than what we've seen maybe in the past. You don't really find too many quarterbacks that you think we could just take it a little bit easier today. We don't have to go 100. Maybe let's give 60 to 70%, and we're still going to get out with a win. That's not the case, especially in this division, like I mentioned. So with that being the case, other positions now have to step up, according to Andre Cisco, and he feels that all these teams in the division have done a great job of trying to do that, and that it will most likely come down to this group to determine a lot of games. And I think that was a great point. It also helps that 3 out of the 4 quarterbacks in this division are still on their rookie deals, which is almost a cheat code for all these teams, because they could go out and make these signings, like obviously Calvin Ridley, re-signing Michael Pittman, bringing on Stephon Diggs' contract, and just going along those lines. It certainly helps to do this, and obviously it's a lot easier. But even with the Jaguars, they just gave a lot of money, obviously, to Trevor Lawrence, but they were able to still draft Brian Thomas, bring Gabe Davis, who is a solid option there, and Christian Kirk is still on the team. So that's a decent wide receiver group. So along that point, along about talking the Jacksonville Jaguars and me mentioning their receiving group as a decent, I think if we were to compare them, and obviously these are the difference makers on the field for these teams, I think the Jaguars and the Colts seem to be third and fourth in those groups. I know I ranked the wide receivers, and I probably had it in that order, as the Colts and the Jaguars are being just a little bit below the Texans and the Titans, in my opinion, just because it was a massive loss for the Jaguars to lose Calvin Ridley. If they had Calvin Ridley still on this team, they would be overflowing with the potential at this group, but especially losing him to the Titans, I think that stings, and it just makes the Titans that much better because they have now 2 number ones. And also with the Colts, you look at them, very young. Josh Downs, very young, going into his second year, and A.D. Mitchell, going to be a rookie this year. Michael Pittman is slowly, to me, I know he just came off of his best year, but I feel like I want to see a little bit more. I know he could be capable of doing a bit more, but for right now, I would probably still take Hopkins, arguably Calvin Ridley, Stephon Diggs, again, arguably Nico Collins, among those players that I could take over Michael Pittman. I just don't think he's distinguished himself that much as of yet. Obviously, not having Anthony Richardson played a part in that, so if he could change my mind and if I could be wrong about him this year, that would be great. It'll just make for these games and make them a lot more competitive if Michael Pittman can just explode onto the scene even more than he did last year. But the Jaguars and the Colts, in my opinion, are just a little bit below the Titans and the Houston Texans there. That's why I sort of mentioned when I was going over some of the potential fits for T. Higgins and also Brandon Ayuk to an extent as a good landing spot with the Jacksonville Jaguars or the Indianapolis Colts. If they got one of those guys, their wide receiver group, again, would jump up from probably a 6 to a 5 right now to making that jump to all the way to a 9, potentially, if you got one of those guys in the next year or the next few months here in this offseason. But I agree with Cisco that these receivers are going to be the difference maker, but how do you stop it? How do you counteract it? Is it more offense? Do you go out and get another wide receiver like I mentioned in T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk? Or do you improve your defense and try to stop it that way? I think it really depends on what kind of fan you are. To me, I love seeing defense. I love seeing the defenses going out there. I love seeing, from time to time, a low-scoring game. I don't want to see every game be low-scoring, but I do appreciate when defenses are going crazy, making plays, just the offenses just can't get anything done. I think it throws a good wrench in the monotony of everything from time to time that it is exciting a little bit when players are making diving pass breakups or interceptions. You get some sacks, you get some great TFLs. I love seeing that, and I think right now, if we were to go that route and trying to improve our defenses to try and negate some of these wide receivers at this position, I think the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans right now are in the best spots to do that, to get a stop on defense, to sort of slow down these high-powered offenses because of how much they've improved on that side of the ball. The Texans bringing in Danielle Hunter. They obviously still had Will Anderson. And on the defensive side of the ball, they signed Al-Shaair, the linebacker. They drafted, I forget his name, the corner from Georgia. His name's just escaping my mind. But overall, I think Houston probably has the most balanced team on the defensive side of the ball. It's hard to pick out one major weakness for them on that side. Then you have the Tennessee Titans, who I think are the second most equipped team to make a defensive stop with how much better they improved their secondary, bringing in L'Jarius Sneed, signing Chidobe Awuzie, already having Roger McCreary, and being a lot more able to play man coverage. The biggest question with them is their pass rush. Can it just be enough with Jeffrey Simmons? He is very good, but to me, that's just not enough. You need a little bit more there. You look at the Indianapolis Colts now, and they are just very young overall. I think last year they had the youngest secondary in the entire NFL, and their pass rush really isn't too prominent right now. They just drafted Laiatu Latu out of UCLA, so that's a little bit more promising there. You hope he comes along a lot quicker, but right now they're a little bit too young, like most of their team is. And the Jacksonville Jaguars arguably have the best defensive line. They're right there with the Houston Texans in my opinion, but questions at their secondary, at the second level with their linebackers, their middle linebackers that is, still give me a little bit unease on how much they can contribute. It can't just all be the defensive line because sometimes they might have an off day, and if the secondary is not giving them enough time to get to the quarterback, obviously that's a problem that they just can't resolve, and it's going to become frustrating for those pass rushers, and they really can't show out if they don't have more than half a second, 1 second to get to the quarterback. It's not going to work out. To me, the Houston Texans are the best equipped to do that, and I think that's the way to go. I think defense, trying to improve your defense is the way to go. With so many talented receivers, you can only really have 3 or 4 out there at a time and really be efficient with it. So improving your defense is the way I think these teams have to go to try and negate and try to create another difference maker out there in this division. It's certainly going to be must-watch football. I can't wait to watch this division, and I think it really rivals the AFC North as the best division in the AFC overall. The AFC East is getting there. The AFC West, not really, with just the Chargers. This and the North are really two of the best, probably the 2 best in the AFC. I'm definitely going to be tuning into those games over the course of this year. But with that being said, we're going to go into another break. And when we return, we got 2 more segments to talk about. More information came out on the Aaron Rodgers case about missing mandatory minicamps. So we'll discuss some of that and what this outlook could be for the New York Jets in 2024. Then a bit of a fun one, some clauses in these NFL contracts that prohibit players from doing certain activities in the offseason now that we're just taking away some of the days up until training camp. A lot of these players have a lot of free time in their hands, so what can they do, what can't they do in this offseason according to their contracts? We're going to get into all those specifics and the potential punishments after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.